you for joining me for my live chat. Today, we are talking about plant-based diets for diabetes. And I'm so excited to have my friend and colleague, dietitian Toby Smithson. I'm going to start that over again. I did not get that off my tongue right. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for my live chat on plant-based diets to fight diabetes. And I'm so excited to have my friend and colleague, Toby Smithson, with me here today. She is an expert in plant-based nutrition, and we're going to have this really great conversation about how you can eat a healthy plant-based diet that can help fight or prevent diabetes as well as manage it. I get so many questions on this topic, so this is going to be super helpful and informative. Check out the blog that goes with this live chat, and you'll get all of the resources that Toby is sharing with us today and one of her recipes. So definitely check that out at SharonPalmer.com. And I just wanted to welcome Toby to the live chat. Hi, Toby.
Hi. I'm super excited about this because everybody loves great news, exciting news. And that's what this whole show is about. It's like really great information, all positive.
Yes. And positive, right? It's about all the great things you can do to have this lifestyle that can help with diabetes, right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Toby. She is the founder of diabeteseveryday.com, and she also has a YouTube channel, Diabetes Every Day. Plus, she's a certified diabetes educational specialist and a registered dietitian. And she has managed her own type 1 diabetes for more than 5 decades, which is, I think, so great because she speaks from experience, So I'm really excited to have you, Toby. And I just wanted to start out by letting you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming an expert, not only in diabetes, but also kind of adding this plant-based knowledge to your field of expertise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was kind of a step process because I didn't know all of this right from the get-go. My journey started actually in 8th grade. So that's a long time ago. In 8th grade, I met a dietetic intern who had type 1 diabetes. And I had been diagnosed with type 1 a couple of years before that. And that's when my life really did a change around. I said, that's it. I am going to become a dietitian. So that's where it started. And then as I started learning more about the dietetics, nutrition, and food science field, I was so glad that I was going on that journey because I was like, I have a lot to offer, not only the book science, but also these personal adventures that I was having with managing diabetes. So I kind of basically combined both of those, that personal experience and then the learned knowledge from going to college and getting my undergrad and my master's degree and becoming a certified, it used to be called certified diabetes educator. Now it's a mouthful. Certified diabetes education and care specialist is what we're officially called now. And as I was moving more into the journey, also of just growing up, I lended, that doesn't sound right. I lended myself. No, I tended to go plant-based. So very, very early on, it was just a personal preference in the beginning of that's the way I wanted to eat. My sister also did. So at the house, that made it easier, for getting plant-based options. And then as I started reading all the research, it was a no-brainer, to follow that type of eating plan. So I combine both plant-based and full disclosure, I am not vegan. I'm a vegetarian and plant-based, just for full disclosure.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that, about, what the different types of plant-based diets are and how they affect diabetes management, because I do think, we've talked about this before, that there are different types of plant-based diets. And my philosophy has always been like, just get on the wagon and start eating more plant-based and find your way to that diet pattern that works for you. I don't know if you have similar thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. as dietitians, the big word and that we use is individualization. Everything is individualized. We know that we're all individuals, and so our eating plans need to work for what works best for us. So looking at our conditions, if we have any chronic conditions, or just there's so many other things involved, just not how are you eating? Everybody should eat the same way. So absolutely to individualize this.
Right.
Yeah. And some of the studies that they've done on plant-based and diabetes prevention, they actually looked at the different types of plant-based diets, vegan, lacto-ovo, semi-vegetarian, pescatarian, and non-vegetarian. That was a big, huge study that they looked at for prevention of diabetes, and the outcomes were amazing. And they followed people for 2 years and saw a huge decrease in risk for those that were non-meat eaters.
Yeah. Was that the Adventist Health Study too that you're referring to? Yeah. Yes. I love that work. And I love the fact that they showed those different types of plant-based diets showed benefits. And overall, kind of the way I looked at that, it seemed like the more plant-based your diet was, you probably got a bigger benefit, but it showed benefits along the way, right?
Right. And that's exactly what your first question to me was posed at, that just starting, that there are positive benefits for just starting, even if it's just starting with adding more vegetables to your plate, getting up to that half of your plate filled with vegetables, that's fine. Or the meatless Monday concept, of picking one meal or one day, slow and steady till you can build yourself up to more of a full or plant-based eating plan.
Yeah. And I've known you for a long time, and we've often gone to nutrition conferences together. And I always remember that, I saw your journey as you were seeing this research and wanting to eat more plant-based. And I also love what you just said about that. You always kind of were attracted to eating more plant-based. And I think as a dietitian, that's just kind of second nature to us. I've always said that I think I've eaten a plant-based diet my whole life, just because, we've always known that eating fruits and vegetables were good, whole grains were good, pulses were good. And, of course, I was raised in a plant-based family as well. But, that's always been kind of ingrained in us to be eating more of those foods. And now it's just the research is really supporting us in that area, right?
Yeah. And I feel like it's just more and more research is coming out. There's more funding going towards this, because I don't ever remember seeing this much research out there. And I haven't seen anything negative in any of the research either. So.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point, because that what we call that in the nutrition world is consistency. There's a consensus forming. When you see the research consistently pointing out certain benefits, then it can make you feel more confident about those suggestions. I mean, when you see one study, just an outlying study that just disagrees with everything else in a field of research, then you have to wonder. But when it comes to plant-based, it's been very consistent. Would you agree with that?
Yes. And also looking at the numbers that they, participants in the research, I think that a lot of times people don't look at that, but, was it 10 people or was it 15,000 people? That makes a big difference on getting, the conclusions. Yeah.
Sometimes you'll see a study in the newspaper and you just see the headline, plant-based diet, does this or that, or a diet or a food does this, but you have to take a little time and read the actual study, like how many people did it include, like you're just saying, or how long was it? And the study that you referred to in Adventist Health Study 2 is a landmark study that's been very well regarded. And I would actually like to ask you a little bit more about some of the other research. I mean, what is this field of research bringing us to? How is it evolving to really give us this idea of how plant-based diets can help with diabetes?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that really are real, like just right in my face when I'm reading them of the things that are happening. When you look at it, a plant-based diet is so, and I know you've talked about this probably a zillion times, was about plant-based diet being so much higher in fiber, which is an area that we all are, the numbers are showing that we need a lot of help in, that most people do not get enough fiber, and you get at least twice as much fiber in a plant-based diet than the traditional American diet. So fiber plays a real important role in diabetes management too. So that's one of the connections there. And we're always promoting higher fiber. It slows down the absorption of the carbohydrate, so then you don't have as many spikes in blood sugar readings. So, when you're looking, well, how can I get more fiber in my diet? If you look to the sources, they're all plant-based, basically. So that's one thing that keeps coming out in the studies. The other thing that I know I wanted to bring up is that people with diabetes are 2 to 4 times higher risk for heart disease. And so while a lot of the studies that I'm talking about that I've reviewed, some are diabetes focused, but there's a lot on heart disease. And if it's heart disease, then I'm looking at it because I know people, I want to say my people, people with diabetes, that's a red flag for me. Oh, if we can reduce the risk of heart disease, then we need to get on board with that. So that's another area, to look at. And what happens is that plant-based diets, if following the healthy plant-based diet, because we know that you could follow an unhealthy plant-based diet, right? The chips and all of and candy and all of that. But a healthy plant-based diet is lower in saturated fat, which lowers the risk of heart disease. There's absolute cause and effect there.
Yes, those are really good points, because I think a lot of people maybe not realize that when we're talking about managing diabetes, we're talking about managing that whole area of like other health conditions that can come along, like heart disease. So we're really thinking of a very big picture, which you really brought out well, things like keeping the heart healthy, the kidneys healthy, all those things. And one of the beautiful things about a plant-based diet, I always say, is what's good for your heart is also good for your brain, for your gut, for your, blood pressure. It's like, it's not just one diet that's good for one thing. It's kind of good for your whole body.
Right.
So now you talked a lot about fiber, which I really agree with 100%, but are there other kind of things about the plant-based diet that could be super good, and, that whole mechanism that could be good for diabetes?
Well, the other thing is the increase in phytochemicals and polyphenols, and that's from basically fruits and vegetables. And, your diet is higher in those types of nutrients that you get. So that is positive. And what happens is that what they found is that reduce in intestinal glucose absorption. When your diet is higher in phytochemicals and polyphenols, it protects and enhances the beta cell function, and that's all dealing in the pancreas, and enhances the peripheral glucose uptake as well. So there's also anti-inflammatory effects, which goes across so many chronic conditions. Diabetes is also, it's important for anti-inflammation as well.
Yeah, because isn't just the very state of diabetes is already inflammatory, right? So, I mean, well, we have, which makes me want to bring up this one thing, because we have prevention and then we have management. So could you kind of like tease that out? Like if we start talking about prevention, like perhaps, your family has a high risk of diabetes, or you have pre-diabetes, or you're just interested in prevention. Could you talk about how plant-based diets could help in that area? And then we can go back and look at management.
Yeah, there's a group, PCRM, Physicians Council.
Physicians Council for Responsible Medicine.
Yes. And they see a lot of people with diabetes. And there's just one clarification that I want to make, that they've seen patients with type 2 pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes go into remission. And something just that I want to clarify, it's not that it's a cure, that you get rid of diabetes. What I say is that once you've been diagnosed with diabetes or pre-diabetes, it's always in your medical record. So it's not that we could just get rid of it. It will be always underlying there, but their diet plan, which is the whole foods, plant-based and very, very low in fat, they are able to see remission, putting for both pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes.
That's a really great point. And I think I said it wrong. It's Physicians Committee for Responsible Nutrition. I love their work. I'm friends with them. I collaborate with them. So check out, we'll make sure we include those resources in the blog. So check those out because they have done amazing work with diabetes. I'm glad you pointed that out. Mm-hmm. So we know that plant-based eating can help prevent diabetes. As we were talking about, the research shows that people who eat all these plant-based diets have a lower risk. And we talked about why that is, the fiber, the antioxidants and all that kind of thing. What about the management side? If you have diabetes, like for example, type 1 or type 2, how would a plant-based diet help you?
Mm-hmm. It's actually very similar in the same way, because really, when I take a step back to look at people, especially type 1 and type 2, but pre-diabetes type 1 and type 2, in the end, management is the same. The only one little caveat difference is the type of medication if you're on medication. That's really the only difference. But people that have type 1 diabetes, type 2, pre-diabetes, generally, it's the lifestyle habits and the management is the same. So it would be the same benefits, having a higher fiber diet to help manage glucose levels is the bottom line, having more phytochemicals in your eating plan. It all works the same. So a lot of people think that they're very different. I have type 1, I have type 2, but in the end, really, when you take a step back, they are very similar. It's the medication part.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, and I think that's where it can get really tricky for people is, for example, if you're insulin dependent, how do you start planning your diet, when it comes to plant-based? And one of the big questions people have all the time with me, and you might get the same thing, is the carbohydrates, because plant-based diets are higher in carbohydrates. So maybe you can help us figure that whole thing out right now. Yeah.
So people with that are taking insulin, whether type 1 or type 2, anybody taking insulin, generally the recommendation is doing that insulin to carb ratio, that you have a certain amount of units of insulin that you take per grams of carbohydrate eaten. So that's one way of managing it if you're on insulin. Interesting, a number of the studies, and I believe PCRM group also, I can't say this word, so I need to think of a different word. What they say is that they don't limit the amount of carbohydrate. So ad libitum or something. I can't say that.
Ad lib, yeah.
So
interesting. Mm-hmm.
It was, and they're still finding success because of all of these benefits. So one of my recommendations that I say all the time is that if you do have diabetes, to check your blood sugar. That's where that individualization and personalization comes in. How is your blood sugar reacting to a diet that's higher in carbohydrate? Check before and 2 hours after eating, the start of eating. That's really important, because when people are asking me those questions about the carbs, is that let's find out. you have the opportunity to find out if you have a blood glucose meter or a sensor, how is this working for me? And if your blood sugars are on the higher side and you're not on insulin, then it may be changing some things on when you're having your carbs or the amount of carbs. Maybe you do need to scale back.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. So have you kind of done some case studies in your work where you've worked with somebody before, who wasn't so much plant-based, and then you watched that process with them? Have you done that?
I have, and it worked out really well. This was somebody that went from, it was interesting. It was a African-American man. So that's not typically, I think, the first people to change. Usually it's a lot of women asking about plant-based, but it was really cool because when holiday time came, all of his family was there and they were like, what are you eating? Like, where's all the all the meat and everything. And he did provide that for everybody else. But it sparked interest. And so he decided on his own to make the change. He had type 2 diabetes, and he did really, really well. His blood sugars were very well managed. He checked them, and he went in for his A1C checks, every 3 to 4 months. So he was keeping on top of it, as well as his lipids, his cholesterol and his triglycerides, just to make sure he was on target. And he did really, really well.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. So I love that. And that's what some of the work with PCRM is finding too, is these transitions and what the benefits. And you were talking a little bit about how to manage the carbohydrates, which is really helpful information. If you're shifting to more plant-based and you're eating more carbohydrates, like checking your blood glucose before and after, and kind of getting on this new lifestyle pattern. But what about the impact of fiber? Because you talked about fiber, and if you start eating whole food plant-based, or even just eating a more plant-based diet that's based on more whole plant foods, like we're talking whole grains, maybe intact whole grains, like farro versus bread, or even whole farro, which is like the kernel of the whole wheat, versus even a whole grain bread is going to have the farro will have a lower glycemic response, and then the beans, which have carbohydrates, but they're so high in fiber and they have a lower glycemic response. So, I mean, does it get to the point where the carbohydrates don't even really matter because they're so bound up in the fiber? Mm-hmm. I mean, I know they still matter, but not to the extent we once thought, right? When we're talking about traditional carbs.
Yeah. And there's some great research on beans that I love for people with diabetes. But really it's for any, when we're talking about people with diabetes, really it's for the whole population,
right?
Actually, because it's healthy eating. There's nothing super special. I know we're more focused on carbohydrates and having, but it's good for everybody. But anyways, this beans study showed that people were able to keep their blood sugar steady up to 4 to 5 hours after eating the beans. That's like amazing. And that's such good news. And beans are filling. And part of the fiber story too is feeling full.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge benefit as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just brought up something that we haven't even touched on, and that's weight management. I mean, plant-based diets are linked with lower weight without even, really trying to lose weight. People report, of course, that's not doesn't work for everybody all the time the same way, but overall, people who eat a plant-based diet weigh less. So what about that whole benefit?
Yeah. And weight is closely associated with increased weight with increased risk of diabetes. So that's all a positive. Generally at a lower weight, your blood sugars are managed better.
Yeah. So that's another huge aspect behind the benefits of plant-based, not only in prevention, but management, right? Even just losing 10% or 5% of your body weight could make a huge impact, right?
Yeah.
In helping you manage. So that the impact of the fiber and then the phytochemicals. And then what about the gut? I mean, that's another whole area too, right?
Right. The gut. There's more and more research, great research on that we're just starting to look into that. And there is a relationship with diabetes, type 2 diabetes as well, which this is a whole new area. I didn't even look at that before. And now there's research that's really showing some positive impact on gut health.
Yeah. So it's just, as we were talking about, it's a diet good for all parts of your body. So, and these are linked with diabetes. Diabetes has so many links with these things. So it all makes sense.
Yeah.
And, I love what you're talking about, the beans, because a lot of it is the protein too. It's like to eat a more plant-based diet, you're shifting to more plant protein. So beans, I recommend people eat them every day. I know that the formal recommendation is a few times a week, but I like to see people eat them every day because they're such a great protein source. They have all those benefits. So, which brings me to my next question is how do we actually start planning the meals? Like, let's say somebody is in that category of prediabetes, type 1, type 2 that you were just talking about, that the diet is very similar. What would be the first step if you want to start going to a more plant-based diet for diabetes?
Yeah, first step is adding more vegetables, starting there, and really looking at, my husband and I talk about this all the time. There's opportunity for opening a can of vegetables or microwaving frozen vegetables, but taking it a step further and looking for creative recipes. We just went to a friend's house for dinner, and I thought, hey, I just saw this recipe that's so unique. It was with celery and chilies and curry powder and cashews. Those were the ingredients. I forgot, it was peanut oil, I think it was. But thought this sounds really unique, and bringing that, something interesting. I mean, it was a conversation piece as well, bringing it to our friend's house. So I never had made a recipe with cooked celery in this way, and it was really, it's like a party in your mouth. It was exciting to have. So, there's vegetables. That's a great start, but also, investigate on some recipes to make them more exciting too. So that would be the first step. And the next step is trying to include at least one plant-based meal a week or a day. You could, whatever you feel comfortable with, and that's slowly moving towards plant-based eating. There is something that I wanted to bring up too, when we talk about protein sources, and I have a list of plant-based protein sources, but on my list, I highlight the grams of protein, but also the grams of carb, because many of them have both. They all have basically both, but this is an example. There's plant-based milks out there, a lot of them, more and more that are coming out. And it's to take time and investigate, what's the best choice for you. So I always personally want to get the most from what I'm eating. And so since it's so high in carbohydrate, plant-based, the plant-based milks that I do look for are those that are lower in carb. They have the good source of protein, but lower in carb. Because, for example, coconut milk. So that there's a big bandwagon on coconut milk. It's low in carb, but aha moment, there's no protein in there. So are you getting the best benefit for it? So I have found pea protein based milks. There's a couple out there that, it's 8 grams of protein. That's equivalent to a glass of dairy milk, but that's equal to an ounce of protein food and less than 1 gram of carb. So that's why, there are vegetarian and vegan recipes out there, but not all may be appropriate for you. So number one, when I'm looking at recipes, I want to make sure that the nutritional analysis is there, the nutrition facts, so I know what is in that recipe and how to fit it in, because it's all about balancing everything into your eating plan. And not all are for everybody. And the recipe that I gave you on the chia pudding, chocolate chia pudding, because I'm a chocolate fan, that is totally vegan. And I developed that recipe on my own because I couldn't find the right recipe for me as somebody with diabetes. Either the portion sizes were huge, you got to look at the portion size, but they were so loaded with carbs. It just didn't fit with me as well as the chia pudding recipe that I developed. And it's chia pudding. It could be used as a snack, dessert, or a snack, or even for breakfast. There's times that I'll eat that for breakfast, depending on what my blood sugar level is. So, making things, again, the big word here is individualize and customize, for what works best for you, and balancing it out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And which really brings me to a question about, the carbs. You're talking about balancing it out and, looking for things that are a little bit lower. So when it comes to, like, for example, some of my recipes that I try to make more diabetes friendly, like I might not add dried fruit on top of a whole grain and this and that, because I'm just conscious that dried fruit, I love dried fruit and I think it's healthy, but I'm just piling on a little bit, too many carbohydrates in that particular dish. And it really is fine without it. I don't know if that's kind of example what you're talking about.
Yeah, making some modification. There's great recipes out there, but you have to make some modification. Just because it's vegetarian or vegan doesn't mean it equals good for you as a person with diabetes. So you really have to take a look at it.
Mm-hmm. And that also brings me to a little side question, and that is like sweeteners. And this is kind of just a side question. I saw you were doing something recently on social media about coconut palm sugar and answering some questions, because, a lot of people who are interested in eating more whole plant food diet, they want to start eating more naturally. Some people call it clean eating. So they want to start really eating more whole foods. And if you do, just some things just need a little bit of sweetener. They just don't quite taste the same. What is your recommendation for that around this whole food plant-based diet that people are trying to eat?
Yeah. So if you want to include, I'm going to say a regular sweetener, we'll say like a sugar sweet, sugar or honey or an agave, what you need to do is just calculate in the carbs that's coming from them. They will bring along carbohydrate. So that's when low calorie sweeteners came about, is because you were able to eat more for less. It was one of those kinds of exchanges. So if you want to use a regular sweetener, you just have to account for the carbohydrates. And again, do that trial and error with your blood sugars. Check your blood sugar before and then 2 hours after to see how your blood sugars are reacting to it. Is it giving you too much of a spike that stays spiked? Then that will tell you if it's working or not working.
What about some of these ones like monk fruit or stevia? How do you feel about those?
Yeah, they're fine, and they don't affect blood sugar readings. They don't make your blood sugar rise, so they're absolutely fine.
Okay, I've been using those a little bit too, and I think people are a little bit more comfortable with some of the, some of those ones that are coming out. So that's really helpful. So back to kind of your meal planning. Do you have any other tips? Because one point you brought up, I'd like to kind of elucidate, and that is there are different types of plant-based diets. We have this whole food diet where we're really talking about whole grains and beans and lentils and vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds, or, like products that are coming in packages and veggie burgers that are, that are highly processed. And then even beyond that, cookies and soda are plant-based, right? So and I know there has been some recent research that's comparing those two diets now. So can you kind of guide us on, this healthy plant-based diet versus the kind of unhealthy diet pattern?
Right. I had made a reference to that earlier, that there's the healthier version versus the cookies and sodas and candies and chips. And again, for people for managing diabetes, it's eating a healthy eating plan. It's the same message for everybody. We wouldn't give that message about, eat plant-based and eat chips and candy and soda. We wouldn't say that. It's the same for people with diabetes, that, and for meal planning, I like to try to include like the plate method, that we use. There's a diabetes plate method as well, that half the plate is filled with vegetables, 1/4 is your protein source, and the other quarter is the carbohydrates. So keeping that in mind as your framework. And we know that the quarter for the protein source probably will be higher in carbohydrates, unless you're doing a semi-vegetarian or a vegetarian diet that you're including dairy or eggs or fish. Those things are low in carbs. Milk and yogurt aren't. I need to take that off. Milk and yogurt do have carbohydrates in it. But if you're including those, that's your protein source. Nuts also go in that, and that nut butters. I love using nut butters. There's a little bit of carbohydrate in nut butters too. So just that it's all a balance. And I like using that plate as the framework.
I love that. I did a live chat with Toby Amador, and we talked all about the diabetes plate method. So for everybody watching, go check out that live chat where we really go through that whole plate method, which is so handy. I think it makes it easy for people, and it can work for plant-based really well too, I think.
Right.
So it's important to, I think for plant-based, what I tell people is it could be easy just to eat nothing but carbohydrates, So I always tell people when they have a snack, try to make sure, like have a whole grain flatbread, but have some peanut butter on it, have hummus with your snow peas, or just try to combine those. Is that something that you kind of recommend as well?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I like having protein and carbohydrate together at the meals or snacks.
Yeah. So, and I think that that's one thing that I see people do on plant-based diets is sometimes they're just focusing on all of these beautiful foods, but they're a little bit skimpy on the protein. And I feel like with diabetes, that could be even more. Of course, protein, we all need protein, but even for that meal planning purpose to keep the glucose nice and stable, it could be more important to just make sure people are balancing that meals and snacks, So that's one of the things. So do you have any other tips that you like to recommend for the people that you work with when it comes to, getting started on plant-based eating for diabetes?
The other thing is just the trial and error. If something doesn't work or you don't like something, then try something else. That's one of the huge benefits of living in society that we are now compared to years ago. There's a lot that's available, and cooking at home is one of your best opportunities to start investigating. If you're going out to a friend's house, like we did the other day, make something that you can eat, not what they're expecting. You're going to bring some floofy dessert or something like that, but make something that's appropriate for you to eat, so that you're assured that you have something good. What's in that recipe. And the other tip is planning. That's like my number one key for diabetes management. So an example with this is that if you're going to somebody's house, or if you're going on a trip, even if you're going out for the day, always have something with you so that you have that to fall back on. Like I always carry nuts and seeds with me, or some crackers for the carbohydrate portion. Like I always have snacks with me. And that's all part of diabetes management. But also on trips, I want to make sure that there's things available for me. I mean, I'll bring oatmeal for every day. There's some things that pack well. We go on a trip. I know people may have oatmeal, but they may not. So I bring my oatmeal and my nuts so that I know, hey, I'm good. It takes a lot of the stress out of it, and anxiety with healthy eating is, you need to speak up for yourself, and planning and preparing is just key.
I love that. And I think I've been on trips with you where we were both eating our plant-based diet and we didn't have very much to eat. So I bring my little oatmeal packets too. And it's one thing that you can find like at Starbucks, I can go in and get their little oatmeal cups, but right. There are things that I always pack dried nuts. Nuts rather, because it doesn't take up a lot of room. It doesn't get crushed in your bag. It's just, and it's shelf stable. It lasts a long time. Right. So that's always in my bag wherever I go. So those are really great tips. And I also wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about your I know I mentioned it at the beginning of the chat, but tell us a little bit more about your program, your YouTube show and everything, so people can follow you.
Yeah, I love that. Just subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's Diabetes Every Day. I post a new video every week on varying topics. Some topics come from my subscribers' requests, and just giving you the credible information, the science-based all of my information is science-based. What happened is I went on YouTube looking for diabetes information a couple of years ago, and I found so much misinformation. So it's this deep passion and drive of mine to get the credible information out there. The more subscribers you get, the more you're shown as credible, which that's not really how it should be, but I want to make sure that there's credible information out there, because science, is very important to go by the science and not just what the headline says or what your friend is following and, hocus pocus and all that kind of stuff. So I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel, Diabetes Every Day. I have a different topic every week. And I also have a website, diabeteseveryday.com, and I have a newsletter, and I also have recipes on there, and I have blog on there as well.
She has great stuff, everyone. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in my doctor's office one day in the waiting room, and here's Toby on the TV talking about diabetes. And it was like piped into the waiting room. I was like, oh, there's my friend.
Yeah.
So
I remember that. You told me that. It's fun.
I know. I love your work. So thank you so much for doing all that you do for people. And please check out all of Toby's resources, and check out the blog at SharonPalmer.com that goes with our live chat, because I'll have all of those resources and links for you. And I'm going to be sharing Toby's chia pudding recipe, which I can't wait to try, because I have one, but it's got a little extra sugar. So I want to try yours. I want to see, I'm sure it's great. But anyway, thank you so much, Toby. It's been great. This is a really important topic, and I'm sure everybody's going to get a lot from this one. Great. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the interview.
Thanks for joining us, guys. See you next time. Bye.